tolerant here as they'd been at home. But the brilliance of what happened in Philadelphia was that the founders recognized that we could be a land which welcomed the diversity of faiths, and we could therefore promote people in business, in secular life, not based upon what they believed, or even based upon the color of their skin. Ultimately, it took us a while to figure that one out, or their gender, or their sexual orientation. We would promote people in our society based on their ability. And that has made all the difference in the world. We lead the world because of that power and greatness associated with that recognition.
You raised the issue of color of skin. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education, desegregated all our public schools. In 1964, civil rights laws giving full equality to black Americans. And yet it wasn't until 1978 that the Mormon Church decided to allow blacks to participate fully. Here was the headlines in the papers in June of '78. Mormon Church dissolves black bias. Citing new revelation from God, the president of the Mormon Church decreed for the first time black males could fully participate in church rites. You were 31 years old, and your church was excluding blacks from full participation. Didn't you think, what am I doing part of an organization that is viewed by many as a racist organization?
I'm very proud of my faith, and it's the faith of my fathers, and I certainly believe that it is a faith, well, it's true, and I love my faith, and I'm not going to distance myself in any way from my faith. But you can see what I believed and what my family believed by looking at our lives. My dad marched with Martin Luther King. My mom was a tireless crusader for civil rights. You may recall that my dad walked out of the Republican convention in 1964 in San Francisco, in part because Barry Goldwater, in his speech, gave my dad the impression that he was someone who was going to be weak on civil rights. So my dad's reputation, my mom's and my own, has always been one of reaching out to people and not discriminating based upon race or anything else. And so those are my fundamental core beliefs. And I was anxious to see a change in my church. I can remember when I heard about the change being made. I was driving home from, I think it was law school, but I was driving home, going through the Fresh Pond Rotary in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I heard it on the radio, and I pulled over and literally wept. Even to this day, it's emotional. And so it's very deep and fundamental in my life and my most core beliefs that all people are children of God. My faith has always told me that. My faith has also always told me that in the eyes of God, every individual was merited the fullest degree of happiness in the hereafter. And I had no question in my mind that African Americans and blacks generally would have every right and every benefit in the hereafter that anyone else had, and that God is no respecter of persons.
But it was wrong for your faith to exclude them for as long as it did.
I've told you exactly where I stand. My view is that there's no discrimination in the eyes of God, and I could not have been more pleased than to see the change that occurred.
Let me talk to you about your campaign. This is how it has been described in numerous cartoons, editorials, news articles, a changed man. Many candidates change. Romney seems to have given himself a makeover, which has prompted more than a few people to ask, who is this guy? Some of your opponents pass out these flip-floppers that Romney flips and flops on the various issues. And it's become a real issue for you in Iowa. The Des Moines Register asked Republicans who aren't supporting you, what's the major factor for not supporting Romney? And look at this. Shifting his position on issues like abortion, 51% of Republicans say that's why they haven't embraced your candidacy. I want to take abortion first. I participated in your debate in 2002 when you ran for governor of Massachusetts. I asked you about that issue, and this was your response. Let's watch.
My position has been the same throughout my political career, and it goes back to the days of 1970. There was a woman who was running for political office, U.S. Senate. She took a very bold and courageous stand in 1970, and that was in a conservative state. That was that a woman should have the right to make her own choice as to whether or not to have an abortion. Her name was Lenore Romney. She was my mom. I will preserve and protect a woman's right to choose, and am devoted and dedicated to honoring my word in that regard.
Devoted and dedicated to honoring your word. When you ran for the Senate against Ted Kennedy, you were asked the same question. This was your response.
Many, many years ago, I had a dear, close family relative that was very close to me who passed away from an illegal abortion. It is since that time that my mother and my family have been committed to the belief that we can believe as we want, but we will not force our beliefs on others on that matter. And you will not see me wavering on that.
you not see you wavering on that issue. You now have said you support the 2004 Republican Party platform, which says this: we say the unborn child is a fundamental individual right to life which cannot be infringed. We suggest a human life amendment to the Constitution. Such amendment would ban abortions all across the country. Why such a dramatic and profound change after pledging never to waver on a woman's right to choose?
Well, you know, Tim, I was always personally opposed to abortion, as I think almost everyone in this nation is. And the question for me was, what is the role of government? And it was quite theoretical and philosophical to consider what the role of government should be in this regard. And I felt that the Supreme Court had spoken and that government shouldn't be involved and let people make their own decisions. And that all made a lot of sense to me. And then I became governor. And the theoretical became reality, if you will. A bill came to my desk which related to the preservation of life. In this case, it happened to be a bill that would authorize cloning, which was, as well as embryo farming, which would be creating new embryos for the purpose of research and then destroying them. And I brought in people from across the country to talk about this bill, from theologians to scientists, provost of Harvard University and others, and talked about it. And I recognized as I went through that effort that I simply could not be part of an effort that would cause the destruction of human life. And I didn't hide from that change of heart. I wrote an op-ed piece in the Boston Globe, described my view that I am pro-life, described why I had changed to become pro-life. I recognize it's a change. You can find you know, many instances of my indicating my position previous to that time of being effectively pro-choice. I didn't call myself pro-choice, but my position was effectively pro-choice, and that position changed. It changed at that point, and every piece of legislation which came to my desk in the coming years as a governor, I came down on the side of preserving the sanctity of life.
Do you believe life begins at conception?
I do. I believe from a political perspective that life begins at conception. I don't pretend to know, if you will, from a theological standpoint when life begins. But
you didn't try to change the Massachusetts abortion laws.
I'm committed to the people of Massachusetts that I would not change the laws one way or the other, and I honored that commitment. But each law that was brought to my desk attempted to expand abortion rights, and in each case I vetoed that effort. I also promoted abstinence education in our schools. I vetoed an effort, for instance, to give young women a morning after pill, they call it, who did not have prescriptions, very young girls without age limitation. So I took action to preserve the sanctity of life, but I did not violate my word, of course.
But when you say you support a human life amendment to ban all abortions across the country, what form would that take? If a woman had an abortion, would she be perceived a criminal? Would a doctor who performed it be perceived a criminal? You talked about your family relative who died from an illegal abortion. And yet President Romney is saying, ban all abortion. And what would be the legal consequences for people who participated in that procedure?
Well, let's do two parts to that. First of all, my view is that the right next step in the fight to preserve the sanctity of life is to see Roe v. Wade overturned, and then return to the states and to the elected representatives of the people the ability to deal with life and abortion on their own.
But Governor, play that out. Some states would allow abortion,
right.
Others wouldn't.
Yes.
Go back to your relative.
Mm-hmm.
They cross the border into
right.
another state,
mm-hmm.
or they stay in their own state and have an illegal abortion. What would be the consequences? Would they be?
I'll get to the consequences.
Please.
I promise.
Please.
But I want to point out that the first step, in my view, is that Roe v. Wade be overturned. And ultimately, as an aspirational goal, I would love it if America came to a point where we are not today, where the people of America would welcome a society that did not have abortion. But that's not where we are. And so I'm not promoting or fighting for a constitutional amendment to ban abortion in all 50 states. I am fighting for an overturning of Roe v. Wade. And the consequences, they would be like the consequences associated with the bill relating to partial birth abortion, which of course does not punish the woman. You wouldn't, I don't think anyone is calling for, maybe someone, but no one I know of is calling for punishing the mother, punishing the woman.
How about the doctor?
But in the case of the doctor, the kinds of penalties would be potentially losing a license or having some other kind of restriction. In the case of partial